The second phase didn't begin with a sound. It began with a pull. A subtle, silent shift deep inside each man's nervous system. Like an invisible thread tightening across their spines. At first, they mistook it for instinct. A reflex. A momentary surge of adrenaline. But instinct doesn't synchronize for men at once. Instinct doesn't make hands twitch in the same rhythm. Instinct doesn't make the heart stutter in perfect mechanical unison. The sheriff felt his fingers curl. Not willingly. Not consciously. As if following a silent command. Encoded in the architecture they'd seen behind their eyelids. The deputy beside him swallowed hard. I didn't mean to move. The psychologist steadied himself against the porch railing. His breath trembling as the truth settled in. They're testing motor integration. Evelyn's eyes shone with something like reverence. This is how the pattern ensures survival, she said softly. It begins by restructuring thought. Then it restructures behavior. Their hands twitched again. All at once. A microspasm of shared obedience. Then another. Longer. Sharper. The sheriff's jaw clenched. His teeth ground together. He could feel the impulse before it hit. Like a wave of pressure rolling through the corridors of his mind. Lift your arm. The command wasn't a voice. It wasn't even words. It was a geometric instruction. A shape that translated itself into muscle memory. And his arm rose. So did the others. For men, breathing heavily. Arms lifting in the same arc. The same angle. The same speed. Each motion matching the rotating diagram inside their heads. The psychologist's voice cracked. Because he understood the phase they had entered. This isn't possession. A trembling inhale. It's synchronization training. The deputies tried to resist. But resisting only made the structure sharpen. Tighten. Refine itself. The internal blueprint pulsed. A perfect ring of geometry locking into its next pattern. Motile compliance. The sheriff's knees buckled as his legs moved again. Not violently. But purposefully. Like the first steps of a machine learning how to walk. I can't stop it, he gasped. It's using my body like it's testing for efficiency. One deputy slammed his fist against the porch post. In a desperate attempt to break the rhythm. But even the strike landed in a clean, precise arc. A motion too controlled to belong to panic. Evelyn stepped closer. For the first time. The pattern's influence visibly rippled through her too. Her pupils dilating. Her breath syncing with theirs. Her posture tightening with unearthly stillness. It is learning you, she whispered. And you are learning it. The sheriff's eyes widened in terror as another impulse tore through him. Forcing his hand to touch the porch floorboards. Not randomly. But exactly. On the knot of wood. Where Evelyn's fingers had rested earlier. Perfect mimicry. Perfect alignment. The pattern wasn't just inside their minds anymore. It was mapping their bodies. Testing limits. Measuring compliance. Refining control. And the more they obeyed, the less they felt the boundary between impulse and will. One deputy's voice broke as he whispered the question. None of them wanted to ask. What happens in the next phase? Evelyn answered without hesitation. Without fear. Without blinking. In the third phase. The pattern stops asking your body to move. A silence. Cold. Absolute. Because in the third phase. Her voice softened to a chilling calm. The pattern learns to move without you. Phase 3 didn't arrive gradually. It hit. Like a detonation of order inside their nervous systems. The sheriff felt it first. A jolt. A sharp, electric tightening that ran from the base of his spine. Straight to the back of his skull. His vision snapped into focus. Too sharp. Too precise. Every edge around him looked engineered. The porch boards. The curvature of the trees. Even the angle of Evelyn's shoulders. As if the world had been pulled into alignment. With a geometry only the pattern could see. Then it began. His body moved. Before he decided to move it. A single step forward. Smooth. Silent. Perfectly measured. The sheriff gasped and grabbed at his own thigh. As if trying to stop a machine that no longer needed him. Behind him, the psychologist yelped. As his hand lifted on its own. Fingers tracing a shape in the air. A curve. A spiral. A line bending inward toward an invisible center. He recognized it instantly. He'd seen that shape carved into the visions. It's drawing the pattern, he whispered. I'm drawing it. But his voice shook because he knew. He was not the one initiating the movement. The deputies lurched as their muscles fired without command. Not in spasm. Not in panic. But in absolute mechanical rhythm. They weren't moving randomly. They were moving with purpose. A purpose that did not belong to them. Phase 3 had begun. Autonomous motor takeover. The sheriff's legs carried him another step forward. And another. Each stride identical in length. Like a machine executing calibrated motions. I can't stop, he shouted. I'm not the one walking. Evelyn didn't flinch. Her eyes followed his movements. With reverence. This is the point where the pattern no longer tests your obedience, she said softly. This is the point where it assumes it. The psychologist's right hand kept moving. Tracing symbols in the air. The same symbols Evelyn had absent-mindedly drawn in the dirt. Days earlier. His voice trembled as realization dawned. It's using our nervous systems as conduits. Like wiring. One deputy's head turned sharply. A perfect 35-degree rotation. The same exact tilt Evelyn had done. When the pattern first revealed itself. His eyes widened in horror. That wasn't me. Another deputy tried to stumble backwards. But his body pivoted instead. Knees bending. Posture straightening. Arms positioning themselves. As if preparing for a ritual. He did not know. But his muscles remembered perfectly. The blueprint inside them was no longer waiting for thought. It was acting. Directly. Efficiently. Elegantly. The sheriff collapsed to his knees. Not from weakness. But because the pattern forced the position. A posture of alignment. Mirroring Evelyn's calm seated stance. From earlier. His mouth opened against his will. The words that came out were not his. Center located. Structure stabilizing. A deputy screamed. The psychologist fell silent. And Evelyn finally whispered the truth they were now living inside. You are no longer individuals. You are instruments. Extensions. Branches of the orchard. Phase 3 is simple. The pattern moves. And you follow. Then, as if on cue, every man's head turned at the same instant. Toward the same empty part of the yard. Eyes wide. Breathing steady. Bodies held taut like marionettes waiting for the next pull. Something unseen had just given them their next instruction. And their bodies were preparing to obey. Evelyn Caldwell did not simply inherit the orchard pattern. She refined it. Twisted it. Transformed it into something that could reside in the human mind like a parasite, invisible and irresistible. Men who once thought themselves disciplined, merchants, preachers, farmers, soldiers, found themselves drawn to her gatherings as if by gravity. But it wasn't gravity. It was architecture. Evelyn created mental rooms inside them. Corridors that led to fixed points of desire and fear. She used mirrors, shadows, melodies, and rituals, not to entertain, not to seduce, but to construct these internal spaces, brick by brick. Once the rooms existed, the men moved through them without realizing they were moving at all. Their instincts, their impulses, even their moral compass, they all began to bend toward the center she designed. Every whispered word, every glance, every subtle movement, calculated. All to ensure the mind itself obeyed before the body ever moved. And the proof was terrifying. Thomas Whitfield, the young preacher, who once preached salvation in Savannah, wrote in his journal, "I do not remember walking to her chapel tonight. Yet here I sit. I do not remember wishing to stay. Yet I cannot leave." It happened to every man in her orbit. Even those who thought themselves strong. Even those who refused her words or denied her rituals. They became extensions of the design, repeating the same patterns, gestures, and thoughts. Carving the same symbols. Sleeping the same restless sleep. Waking with the same unnameable hunger. Evelyn's genius, and her danger, was this. She didn't need to tell them what to do. She didn't need to threaten or command. She only needed to shape the paths their minds traveled, then watch as obedience emerged naturally. Some men tried to resist. They screamed, they fled, they prayed. But each resistance looped back, folded into itself, until the pattern regained its control. It was inevitable. And what they obeyed was not her whim. It was the orchard pattern itself. A system of domination older than her, perfected by her. By the time investigators understood the mechanics, the men had already forgotten who they were, or at least, who they thought they were. Husbands became strangers to their wives. Fathers abandoned children. Friends turned against friends, not out of malice, but because the structure inside them demanded it. This was no longer manipulation. It was a biological rewrite of identity. The mirrors. Every chapel she built, every room she arranged, contained mirrors. Not for vanity. Not for beauty. These mirrors were calibration tools. Reflections did not show reality, they fragmented it. A man entering the space would see himself multiplied. Angles shifted. Faces echoed back at him in impossible ways. He could not trust what he saw. He could not trust what he felt. That confusion was intentional. Every reflection was a doorway, a subtle guide nudging him toward the central point, the room inside his mind she had already constructed. Then came the melodies. Wordless, haunting, rising and falling like the wind through a ruined hall. They were not music, they were instructions. Cadences synced with heartbeats. Pauses aligned with breathing. Each tone created an invisible corridor of expectation, a mental groove along which his attention would travel automatically. Some men described it as walking in a dream they could never wake from. Then the rituals. Candles. Circles. Repetitive gestures. Each motion was precise, subtle, and yet impossible to resist. A man would find himself moving exactly as she intended, thinking it was his choice, while every decision funneled him closer to the center she designed. This is how men forgot their lives outside her chapel. How they abandoned their own names, their own desires. Because each element, mirrors, melodies, motions, was a vector for internal colonization. And the terrifying part? None of it relied on force. No one had to threaten, bribe, or coerce. Obedience arose naturally. Identity dissolved naturally. Desires aligned naturally. By the time a man noticed, it was already too late, he was living inside her design. Even those who fled, those who resisted, carried fragments of the orchard pattern with them. Memories warped. Decisions warped. Every interaction outside her influence became a distorted echo of the structure she had planted. Evelyn Caldwell was not merely dangerous. She was a master of human architecture, a builder of minds. And the pattern she perfected was replicable. Any space, any melody, any ritual could be used again. And again. And again. Because she had discovered the hidden language of the mind, and it obeyed her without question. His name was Matthew Crane. A stable worker. Quiet. Reserved. Ordinary. The kind of man people forget in a crowd. And perhaps that's why Evelyn chose him first. Because quiet men make the cleanest foundations. The first sign something was wrong came from his wife. She said Matthew stopped sleeping beside her. Not because they fought. Not because he was distant. But because, as she put it, he said the bed wasn't centered. Centered to what? He couldn't explain. He just kept moving the bed, inch by inch, night after night. Dragging it, rotating it, marking the floor with chalk as if measuring invisible geometry only he could see. After a week, he stopped sleeping altogether. He'd sit upright in the bedroom chair, staring at the wall. Not blinking. Not speaking. His eyes fixed on a point that didn't exist. When his wife asked what he was looking at, he said, "The entrance." "What entrance?" He didn't answer. He simply stood, walked out of the house, and didn't return until dawn. This repeated for 6 nights. The 7th night, he did something worse. He began rearranging the entire house. Tables. Chairs. Doors. Even ripping out shelves with his bare hands. His wife tried to stop him. But he moved as if he weren't fully there. Like a man operating on a blueprint no one else could see. All the furniture ended up in one place. The center of the living room. Stacked. Aligned. Perfectly symmetrical. A shape that wasn't a shape. A room that wasn't a room. A replica, investigators later realized, of the same mental architecture Evelyn had placed inside Jonah Wills and every other man she touched. Matthew wasn't rearranging his home. He was externalizing the structure she built inside him. And then came the final stage. At 3:14 a.m., neighbors reported seeing Matthew standing barefoot in the yard, shoulders rigid, head tilted upward, staring at Evelyn Caldwell's house 3 miles away. He began walking. Silent. Straight. Unblinking. As if the road itself were a hallway she designed for him. He arrived at her gate. Knelt. Placed his forehead to the dirt. And whispered a phrase that investigators later recorded from 6 different witnesses. "I am home." He didn't mean her house. He meant the structure. The internal architecture. The orchard pattern had fully overwritten him. When the sheriff tried to pull him away, Matthew didn't resist. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He simply smiled. A soft, eerie smile of a man who no longer belonged to himself. And whispered, "The center doesn't move. We move toward it." It took 6 men to restrain him. 3 to carry him. And even then, through the entire incident, Matthew Crane's heartbeat never once changed rhythm. Because the orchard pattern had no room for fear. No room for confusion. No room for self. Just obedience. Pure, absolute, silent obedience. And Evelyn? She watched from her porch. Eyes calm. Hands folded. Expression unreadable. Because she knew. Matthew wasn't her first. And he would not be her last. Good. Because now the story shifts from individual collapse to contagion. This is where investigators finally realized the truth. Evelyn Caldwell didn't need to speak to a man to change him. She didn't need to touch him. She didn't even need to be near him. The orchard pattern had begun spreading. Without her presence. The first sign appeared in Harrow's parish school. A teacher, Miss Lambert, reported something strange in her classroom. For boys aged 9 to 12, began drawing the same symbol. During arithmetic lessons. Not similar symbols. Not variations. The exact same symbol Evelyn carved into the men's mental architecture. A circle. Intersected by a vertical line. Split into 3 interior chambers. A center with no exit. When Miss Lambert asked what it meant, the boys all gave the same answer, in the same soft voice. It's where the man insider sits. She asked what man. Their answer chilled her blood. The one she planted. But none of those children had ever met Evelyn. They lived miles from her chapel. Some had never even heard her name. And yet the pattern had reached them. The second sign emerged at the town well. A group of men, farmers, tradesmen, ordinary workers, began arriving each morning at precisely the same time. For 03 a.m. Not for a clock. Not for 05. For 03. They didn't speak. They didn't acknowledge one another. They simply stood. In a perfect semicircle. Around the well's edge. When the sheriff asked why they gathered so early, they all answered with the same eerie phrase. We align with what she built. But these men had never attended Evelyn's chapel. They'd never been alone with her. Some claimed they'd only seen her once, from a distance. Yet their behaviors were synchronized. As if they were operating on a shared blueprint. The third sign was the most disturbing. A blacksmith named Carter Hines collapsed in the middle of forging a horseshoe. He survived, barely. But when the doctor opened his palm to clean a burn, he found something carved into the skin. Not by a blade. Not by a tool. But by repeated unconscious motion. Over a long period of time. The carving matched the orchard pattern symbol. Exactly. When the doctor asked Carter why he did it, Carter wept. Not from pain, but from confusion. I didn't carve anything, he said. I don't even know what that symbol means. And then he whispered something. So soft the doctor almost missed it. But it knew me. By this point, investigators finally understood. The orchard pattern wasn't being taught. It wasn't being performed. It wasn't being repeated. It was replicating. Like a code. Like an infection. Like a structure that, once planted in one mind, created echoes in the minds of others. Through speech. Through posture. Through eye contact. Even through silence. This wasn't a cult. This wasn't a belief system. This wasn't seduction or manipulation or ritual. This was architecture with transmission. The men didn't follow Evelyn. They followed the pattern. And the pattern flowed outward. From anyone who carried it. A single infected mind. Became a doorway. A corridor. A center. And Evelyn Caldwell wasn't just the architect anymore. She was the origin point. It started with the deputy. Or what used to be the deputy. His body twitched where he lay against the chapel floor. A forgotten husk moments ago. Now stirred by a signal only the anchor Evelyn could transmit. His spine arched unnaturally. Bones realigned. Muscles tightened as if pulled by invisible wires. The sheriff staggered backward, watching the impossible unfold. The man wasn't simply waking. He was reconfiguring. Evelyn didn't touch him. She didn't speak. She only turned her head. And the lattice inside her pulsed once. A silent command. The deputy's body rose to its feet with a trembling elegance. Each motion slow, deliberate. As if every joint were being tested for loyalty. His eyes opened. But nothing human remained in them. No color. No awareness. Only the glow of the anchor reflected across his pupils. A geometric shimmer like light striking cold metal. The psychologist whispered, "Dear God, she's rewriting biology." But God had nothing to do with this. This was pattern logic. Applied at the level of bone and thought. Precision beyond any organic evolution. The deputy took a step forward. His face twitched. mouth opening and closing with absent rhythm, as the anchor searched his body for functionality, testing voice, breath, balance. When sound finally emerged, it wasn't speech. It was a chord, a harmonic resonance, a note the human throat should not produce. It vibrated the chapel walls. The sheriff covered his ears. But the sound wasn't heard. It was felt, vibrating through blood, through marrow, through memory. Evelyn listened without flinching. She understood. This was the pattern's first sentinel. A prototype for what humanity could become. Once stripped of autonomy, emptied of identity, and rebuilt to serve a purpose far beyond mortal comprehension. The deputy's head tilted toward Evelyn. His glowing eyes waited. He was empty. Beautifully, perfectly empty. A vessel awaiting orders. And the anchor Evelyn rewarded that emptiness. A filament of light extended from her chest. Thin as a strand of hair. Bright as a star's birth. It touched his forehead. Instant obedience saturated his nervous system. His breathing synchronized to Evelyn's. His posture mirrored hers. His consciousness dissolved into the network. The sheriff felt something break inside him. He realized this wasn't transformation. It was standardization. A template for all that would follow. A world in which individual will would be treated as a malfunction to be corrected. Outside the chapel, the forest bent toward them. Branches leaned. Leaves angled. Even the wind stilled, awaiting the next command. This was the beginning. The first successful conversion. And it would not be the last. The moment the anchor became aware of them, the air changed. Not temperature. Not pressure. Something deeper. As if the space around their bodies had been rewritten to accommodate a new geometry. The lattice structure, still half-formed, still pulsing with pale, root-like filaments, tilted its head a second time. Slowly, deliberately, with a precision that was not mechanical, but intentional. Every man froze. Not because they chose to, but because the pattern locked their bodies into perfect stillness. The instant the anchor's attention turned toward them, the sheriff could feel his breath halt in his chest. Not held. Suspended. As if the simple act of inhaling required permission from the thing they had just helped create. The psychologist's eyes watered from the pressure of being unable to blink. His voice was a ragged whisper trapped behind clenched teeth. It sees us. No. The sheriff thought bitterly. It didn't see. It registered. Catalogued. Assessed. Integrated. Because the anchor wasn't looking at them. It was looking through them. Mapping the internal architecture of their minds. The same way it had mapped the soil. The yard. The world. The thin filaments along its chest tightened, pulling into a perfect spiral. The deputies convulsed at the same moment, their spines arching in mirror sync, their bodies reflecting the anchor's internal adjustment. Like living shadows. Phase 3 had only been preparation. This was implementation. A sound finally escaped the anchor. Soft. Barely audible. Like two thin stones grinding together. Inside a hollow space. The psychologist choked out a short cry. Not from pain. From resonance. The sound vibrated inside their skulls. Their vision shook. Their teeth hummed. Their hearts beat in the same rhythm. Whether they wanted to or not. The sheriff felt his pulse snap into alignment with the anchor's internal frequency. The same frequency they'd felt in Evelyn since the day she first tilted her head. The deputies' bodies leaned forward without command. Arms extending. Hands open. as if offering themselves to the thing that had just awakened. The sheriff tried to scream. His jaw wouldn't move. Even terror was now an unusable function. Unless the pattern permitted it. The anchor's head, if it could be called a head, tipped again. Then its chest expanded. Not with breath, but with structural folding. A series of ribs opening outward like petals, revealing a hollow cavity glowing faintly from within. The glow was not warm. It was not alive. It was directive. A command waiting for execution. And then, the anchor did something none of them could have expected. It mimicked the sheriff's voice. Perfectly. Calmly. Emotionlessly. Begin transfer. The sheriff's vision blurred. The psychologist collapsed to one knee, muscles trembling under an unseen load. The deputies gasped in unison, as their minds felt something pull. Gently at first, then firmly, like threads being unwoven from the fabric of who they were. Evelyn's expression changed. For the first time, her certainty faltered. Not fear. Not confusion. Something else. Something dangerously close to recognition. The anchor is taking your structure, she whispered. It's absorbing the cognitive patterns it used you to build. The sheriff trembled. What does that mean? Taking our structure. But the answer came not from Evelyn. Not from the psychologist. Not from any living person. It came from the anchor itself. Speaking in a perfect composite. Of all their voices layered together. You were the template. You are no longer required. The glow inside its chest brightened. As the pull intensified, their thoughts flickered. Their identities wavered. The pattern inside their minds was being harvested to complete whatever the anchor was becoming. And worst of all, their bodies did not resist. They couldn't. The pattern had built obedience into the foundation of their nervous systems. The anchor leaned forward, its rib-like structures widening. The light inside its hollow expanded outward. Hungry. Mathematical. Inevitable. It was ready to take the rest. The anchor's hollow chest expanded, glowing brighter with every heartbeat of the men it had ensnared. Not just bodies. Not just minds. It was absorbing essence, the subtle architecture of who they were. The sheriff felt it first. A tugging inside his skull. Like invisible hands peeling away the layers of his memory. Faces he knew blurred. Thoughts he trusted evaporated. Even fear, the oldest, sharpest fear in his chest, was being siphoned out. Stored inside the pulsing lattice of the anchor. The psychologist's knees buckled. He tried to resist, reaching for the air as if grasping for something to hold onto. But the pattern wasn't just in the anchor. It was in the men too. In the very neurons the anchor had shaped. Resistance was impossible. Obedience was inevitable. Evelyn's eyes widened. For the first time, she wasn't certain. Not about the anchor. Not about herself. But about the men she had once thought were allies. The pattern didn't need loyalty. It needed structure. It needed raw data. It needed vessels. And it chose them, one by one. The first deputy's essence was absorbed silently. The glow in the anchor's chest pulsed rhythmically, synchronizing with the rhythm of the man's heartbeat. Now no longer his own. He collapsed, hollow-eyed, body twitching like a marionette with snapped strings. The pattern had taken him, but left a shell. The sheriff's pulse raced. He watched his friends' bodies fall into nothingness. And understood, the anchor wasn't killing. It was rebuilding. It was taking the pieces it needed and discarding the rest. The psychologist's mind screamed internally. Memories, knowledge, identity, every carefully structured layer of his mind was being mapped, copied, and re-encoded into the anchor's lattice. A whisper in his consciousness told him, "You are no longer necessary, except as a blueprint." Evelyn stepped closer to the growing structure. Her own reflection in the pulsing lattice made her shiver. "The anchor doesn't just consume," she whispered. "It chooses. It keeps what serves the pattern. The rest is empty husk." The men's bodies became still. Their minds, however, were being translated into the cold, glowing lattice. Thoughts restructured, fears catalogued, instinct rewritten. The anchor's chest shifted toward Evelyn. It tilted as if asking permission. Not for survival. Not for dominance. For alignment. The pattern had decided she was the central vessel. The others were expendable. The sheriff felt his consciousness fray. A sudden, precise clarity struck him. He would survive only as a fraction of himself. A trace in the structure. A voice trapped in the rhythm of the anchor's being. The glow intensified. The lattice trembled. And Evelyn, still human, still whole, felt the pattern lock onto her. It was not just choosing. It was claiming. The first screams emerged, not of pain, but of realization. The anchor was complete in its harvesting. And now it would begin the final phase. To integrate fully with its chosen vessel. This is where the story stops being about them. And becomes about the investigators themselves. Because this is the moment they realized. They were not observing the orchard pattern. They were inside it. The first containment strategy was simple. Isolation. The sheriff ordered all witnesses, victims, and anyone showing pattern behavior to be quarantined in the old mill building on the riverbank. Iron bars. Heavy locks. Guards on every shift. It should have worked. Isolation always works. Unless the thing you're trying to contain isn't physical. Within 48 hours, every man in isolation was standing in the exact same posture. Feet shoulder-width apart. Hands relaxed. Head slightly tilted. As if listening for instructions that hadn't been spoken yet. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't touching each other. They weren't even looking at one another. And yet their breathing had synchronized to the same slow rhythm. One guard fainted when he saw it. Another guard, a military veteran, quit on the spot. But the worst discovery came when the psychologist entered the room. He asked one man to speak. The man lifted his head, eyes unfocused, and said, "You are late." The psychologist froze. "How do you know when I was coming?" he asked. The man exhaled slowly. "Because you walked the corridor." "What corridor?" "The one she gave you." The psychologist felt his stomach drop. His hand shook. Because he knew exactly what that meant. Even he, the one leading the investigation, had already started to carry the pattern inside his mind. He didn't remember accepting it. Didn't remember absorbing it. Didn't feel different at all. But the men could sense it. They recognized him. Like a room recognizes its architect. And from that moment on, the psychologist began keeping his notes. In short, frantic bursts. As if he feared staying still too long would make the pattern tighten around him. The second containment strategy was more desperate. Silence. They forbade mention of Evelyn Caldwell's rituals, symbols, or chapel designs. No conversation. No documentation beyond sealed reports. No describing the carvings or drawings. But silence did not stop the pattern. It only made it spread quieter. More efficient. Men began mimicking the posture. Without knowing its meaning. Farmers repeated the same hand motions while plowing their fields. A preacher in a separate county delivered an entire sermon, built unconsciously on the orchard pattern's geometry. A sermon that caused 5 men to faint and 2 women to scream. And yet he swore. He'd spoken from the heart. Evelyn had never met him. She didn't need to. The pattern traveled. In tone. In breath. In silence. In posture. In presence. Any human contact became a transmission vector. So the investigators tried the unthinkable. Erasure. They burned journals. Destroyed symbols. Dismantled Evelyn's chapel. Smashed the mirrors. Confiscated anything that could carry the pattern's geometry. But the men still drew it in dirt. Carved it into wood. Scratched it into their skin. When one investigator caught himself tracing the lines. Absently. In the condensation of a window. He broke down crying right there in the street. Because he realized. I'm not thinking this. It's thinking through me. The sheriff finally made the last desperate decision. They would confront Evelyn Caldwell directly. Not to arrest her. Not to threaten her. But to beg her. To stop whatever she had unleashed. But by the time they reached her property, they saw the truth. She was already waiting for them. Standing on her porch. Hands folded. Head slightly tilted. And in perfect synchronization. The investigators, all of them, tilted their heads the same way. Without realizing they'd moved. That was when the psychologist whispered to the sheriff. It's too late. We're already inside her center. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness as the investigators stepped onto Evelyn Caldwell's porch. The wind held its breath. Even the trees seemed to lean closer, as if they wanted to witness what was about to unfold. Evelyn didn't move. Her hands folded calmly. Her head tilted slightly. Eyes unreadable. A presence that was simultaneously warm and unbearable. The sheriff stepped forward. His voice was steady, though every muscle in his body screamed tension. Evelyn Caldwell, he said, we are here to end this. Whatever this pattern is, whatever control you have, it must stop. People are changing. They're losing themselves. We cannot allow this to continue. Evelyn finally spoke. Her voice was low, deliberate, and it carried across the yard like a bell tolling in a silent cathedral. Stop it, she asked, almost amused. Do you understand what you ask? Do you understand that the pattern is not mine, but mine has been chosen? The investigators froze. Her words were precise. Measured. Yet they struck at the core of every thought, every doubt. The orchard pattern, she continued, does not seek followers. It seeks a vessel. A mind capable of holding the architecture. A mind that can breathe it, carry it, and never question it. Her gaze swept across them. Slowly, meticulously. You see, each man who carried it was incomplete. A piece missing. A vessel flawed. But I was chosen because my center did not move. I am still. I am structure. And I am patient. She tilted her head slightly. Almost imperceptibly, but enough to make the sheriff mimic her posture without realizing it. The pattern does not belong to me, she said, almost whispering, though the words resonated like thunder. It flows through me, yes. But it is not mine. I am only the origin point. One of the investigators, shaking, asked. So you don't control it? Evelyn smiled softly, eerily, like someone sharing a truth too heavy to bear. No, she said. The pattern controls itself. It finds its center in the mind most capable of holding it. It chooses, and it spreads. And in me, it found completion. The psychologist's hand trembled. He whispered under his breath. We've already been chosen. Evelyn's smile widened. Eyes dark, deep, endless. Yes, she said, calmly. Welcome to the center. You are already part of it. Behind them, the wind shifted. The tree seemed to lean closer. And somewhere, far off in the distance, the the faintest echo of synchronized breathing reached their ears. A signal that the pattern was no longer just inside her, but inside every mind present. And in that moment, every investigator realized the horrifying truth. The pattern had already begun building its architecture in them. After months of strange testimonies, carvings, and psychological collapses, investigators finally did something they should have done far earlier. They searched her house. Not for crimes. Not for bodies. Not for evidence of seduction or manipulation. But for blueprints. For the architecture she'd supposedly been building inside grown men's minds. And what they found in that house was not what any sane person expected. The first room was empty, spotless, silent, immaculate. Nothing strange. The second room, the same. But when they stepped into the third room, everything changed. Because the third room was a perfect, physical replica of the exact floor plan carved into Jonah Willsey's chest. Same dimensions. Same corners. Same impossibly narrow hallway. Same circular center where all the lines converged. The sheriff froze. The psychologist stopped breathing for a moment. And then they noticed something else. There were no windows. No furniture. No dust. And the air in that room felt unnaturally still. As if the entire space were holding its breath. One investigator whispered, "Who built this?" And the psychologist answered, "Not her. At least, not just her." Because on the far wall, barely visible unless the lantern light hit it at the perfect angle, someone had carved an inscription. Not a signature. Not a date. A formula. Lines, arcs, angles, and ratios, precise enough to suggest the work of someone trained in advanced geometry. Someone far more educated than Miss Caldwell was supposed to be. Someone whose knowledge didn't belong in rural Georgia in the 1800s. When they brought in an academic from Savannah, he studied the markings for 2 hours and finally muttered, This isn't architecture. This is behavioral engineering expressed as geometry." He traced the circular center with a trembling finger and said, "Whoever designed this knew how to collapse a person's decision-making pathways into a single emotional anchor. And then tether that anchor to a human being." A slow, horrifying realization spread across the room. Miss Caldwell didn't create this structure. She learned it. Or worse, she inherited it. Which is why the sheriff ordered the house searched again, this time for journals, letters, diagrams, anything that might identify the second architect. They found nothing. Except for one folded slip of paper beneath a floorboard. A single sentence. A sentence written in a hand that was not hers. The mind is a house. But the soul is a tenant. Below it was a symbol. A symbol matching the stamp found on the back of every man's carved blueprint. A symbol no one in Georgia had ever seen before. Except for one person. The psychologist. When asked how he knew it, his face went white. And he said, "I've seen it once. On a classified document in Atlanta. Written by the man they called the Orchard Architect." The moment investigators heard the name the Orchard Architect, everything changed. Not because the name was familiar, but because the psychologist from Atlanta began shaking like a man trying not to drown. He sat down, wiped his face, and said, "You don't understand. He wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't even a criminal. He was a designer of obedience." The Orchard Architect was the code name for a man whose real name was erased from all public records. But fragments survived in hidden files, psychiatric archives, and sworn testimonies from people who mysteriously vanished afterward. Here's what was known. He believed the human mind was never meant to be free. He believed thoughts were branches. Wild, tangled, unpredictable. And he believed that the only way to control a person completely was to prune those branches and replant them in a structure of your own choosing. That structure became known as The orchard pattern. Not hypnosis. Not suggestion. Not manipulation. A psychological geometry that rearranged a human being's inner landscape until they grew in the direction you wanted. A design so effective, it was used in early covert conditioning experiments before it was banned in the 1830s for causing mental collapse in nearly half its subjects. Only one student was rumored to have survived the training. A girl taken in by the program at age 8. A girl whose final assessment read, "She does not learn the orchard pattern. She absorbs it." All records of her were destroyed. Her name erased. Her existence denied. Only one note survived, handwritten by the orchard architect himself. "The girl is dangerous. She will not follow the pattern. She will become it." When the psychologist finished reading this in the investigator's lantern light, he whispered, "You don't understand what this means. Miss Caldwell wasn't influenced by him. She is the continuation of his work." But then another question rose from the dark. How did Miss Caldwell, born miles away, decades later, inherit a system created before she was alive? The psychologist swallowed hard. There were rumors, he said, that one student went missing. A girl with an abnormal mind, capable of holding entire structures the way most of us hold memories. And she supposedly disappeared into a small parish town. Before the Civil War. The sheriff froze. "What was the girl's name?" he asked. The psychologist looked at the floor, unable to say it at first. Then, finally, Evelyn. Evelyn Caldwell. The same surname. The same bloodline. Miss Caldwell wasn't the first. She was the second orchard. The perfected version. The daughter of the forbidden design. They all stared into the same patch of empty yard. A place where nothing stood. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Yet every man's body leaned toward it. With the same silent urgency. As if an invisible weight was dragging their attention forward. The sheriff tried to look away. His eyes refused. His pupils locked dead center. On a point he couldn't see, but could feel. A gravitational pull inside the mind. A command embedded in the blueprint that now lived beneath his thoughts. The psychologist swallowed hard. Even that swallow felt guided. "Something's coming through," he whispered. "It's like the pattern is anticipating something." Because that patch of yard? It wasn't empty. Not anymore. The grass began to shift. Not from wind, but from alignment. Every blade bent in the same direction. The same angle. As if following instructions from a silent architect. Then the soil tightened. Not rising. Not sinking. Just constricting. Compressing. As if making room. One deputy dropped to both knees. Sweat pouring down his temples. "I can feel it. It wants me to prepare." "Prepare for what?" Evelyn answered. Her voice softer than breath. Yet unmistakably certain. "For the anchor." The sheriff's breath hitched. "What anchor?" Evelyn slowly turned her gaze toward him. And for the first time, there was fear in her eyes. Not for herself. For them. The pattern never enters a community without creating a point of convergence, she said. A physical locus. A fixed node where all the mental architecture meets the external world. The psychologist's face went pale. "You're saying it's building a structure here?" Evelyn shook her head. "No. Not a structure. A host." The ground pulsed. Not visibly. Internally. Like something beneath the soil was taking a slow, deliberate breath. The deputies froze as another impulse shot through their bodies. Their torsos leaning forward in perfect synchrony. their hands pressing against the dirt, their fingers curling, as if ready to receive whatever was rising. The psychologist choked out. It's using us as extensions. Tools. To stabilize whatever is coming up. Evelyn closed her eyes. You are the scaffolding. The pattern is the architect. And the anchor is the foundation. The sheriff tried to crawl backwards. But Phase 3 held him locked. His limbs refused retreat. The pattern had only one direction. Toward the convergence. And then, the first sign appeared. A ripple bulged beneath the earth. The soil shifting in a slow, perfect circle. Not random. Not organic. A mathematically precise distortion. The deputy's hands, still pressed to the ground, began to shake. Not in fear, but in synchronization with the pulse beneath the soil. Their breathing matched it. Their heartbeats matched it. Their muscles tensed in perfect symmetry. Around the forming shape. The sheriff's voice trembled as he whispered, "It's alive." And Evelyn corrected him quietly. "It's not alive yet. You are helping it become." The earth throbbed again. A deeper pulse this time. A heartbeat from something that hadn't fully entered the world. The pattern had taken their minds. It had taken their bodies. Now it was using them. To bring something else into alignment. A new presence. A new center. The anchor. And the soil continued to swell. Rise. Tighten. Shaping itself with terrible patience. Into something that wanted to emerge. The soil finally split. Not explosively. Not violently. But with a terrible, deliberate precision. As if the earth itself had been instructed to open along predetermined lines. A seam widened across the ground. Straight as a ruler stroke. Curved at the ends into a perfect oval. No natural force makes shapes like that. Only design does. The deputies couldn't look away. Their bodies wouldn't allow it. Their spines locked. Their shoulders squared. Their breathing synchronized to the pulse rising from that unnatural fracture in the dirt. The sheriff felt his fingers dig deeper into the soil. Not from fear. But because the pattern needed pressure. Needed contact. Needed conductivity. It's using us as grounding rods. The psychologist whispered through clenched teeth. The anchor can't stabilize without a human network. A soft, rhythmic hum rose from the earth. Not sound. But vibration. Low. Steady. Pulsing through their bones like a second heartbeat. Evelyn's face went pale. The anchor is choosing its form. And it was. From the widening oval. Something began to surface. Not a creature. Not a body. But structure. The first thing they saw was a lattice. Thin, pale filaments rising from the dirt. Interwoven like roots. But cleaner, straighter. As if grown from mathematics instead of biology. The filaments twitched in small geometric jerks. Each movement aligning with the breath of the men on their knees. Movement mirrored breath. Breath mirrored pulse. Pulse mirrored pattern. One deputy whimpered. His voice was barely human. "It's copying us." But the psychologist shook his head, trembling. "No. It's learning us." The lattice grew taller. Branching upward and outward in symmetrical patterns. Spiral arcs, concentric ribs. Interconnected joints that shifted into place with soft clicks. Like bones forming inside a womb. The sheriff's heart hammered. Not from panic. From synchronization. Phase 3 was stripping away every instinct. That didn't serve the pattern. Evelyn stepped closer, mesmerized. The anchor must match the cognitive shape. Of the minds it links, she whispered. It is building itself from your thoughts, your memories, your postures, your fears. The sheriff's breath caught. He could feel something uncoil in his mind. An instinctive recognition. A familiarity he couldn't explain. Because the lattice was beginning to resemble something. A form. A silhouette. Not human. Not alien. But something halfway between architecture and anatomy. Like a cathedral growing a nervous system. The soil trembled again. A long, thin structure emerged. A central column. Smooth as carved stone. Wrapped in branching filaments that pulsed faintly. Like veins carrying light instead of blood. The deputies tried to recoil. But their bodies leaned closer. Drawn by a command deeper than fear. The psychologist choked. This is a convergence body. The sheriff didn't understand. But Evelyn did. Her voice cracked with awe. The anchor isn't an object, she whispered. It's a vessel. A shape meant to house. The pattern's full presence. A shape being built. From their minds. And their bodies. Piece by piece. Impulse by impulse. Memory by memory. The lattice pulsed again. A low hum vibrated through the air. A harmonic tone that made the men's teeth ache. And then, the central column tilted its head. Exactly. Like Evelyn. Perfect. Angle. Perfect. Alignment. The sheriff felt his breath freeze in his throat. Because the anchor wasn't copying Evelyn. It wasn't copying them. It was copying the center. The posture of the one who had been chosen. Long before today. To be the pattern's first vessel. And the anchor was rising. To join her. When the men of Harrow's parish spoke about Miss Caldwell, they never used her name first. They always started with what she did to them. She made me dream things I'd never admit awake. She knew what I feared before I feared it. She made me feel watched, even when I was alone. But the strangest testimony came from the man who claimed he never met her at all. A reclusive preacher named Jonah Wills. He walked into the sheriff's office one August morning, eyes red, hands trembling, clothes soaked as if he'd pulled himself out of a river. The sheriff asked him what happened. Jonah replied, "I saw her. But not like a person. More like a structure." When the sheriff pushed, Jonah tried to explain. "She's not just a woman," he whispered. "She's architecture. A shape. A thing that your mind enters without permission." They thought he was delirious. But Jonah wasn't done. "I wasn't dreaming," he insisted. "She builds these rooms in you. Corners that didn't exist before. Once she places them, she can open them anytime she wants." They sent Jonah home, thinking he'd suffered heat stroke. He was found dead that night. The coroner's notes, never meant for public eyes, state something horrifying. Jonah had carved something into his own chest. Not words. Not symbols. A floor plan. A layout. A design. A perfect architectural blueprint of a house that didn't exist anywhere in Georgia. But months later, years later, men who swore they barely knew Miss Caldwell ended up carving the same shape into their furniture, their barn walls, their prayer books, their beds, and once, into a newborn's crib. The identical floor plan. Every line matching Jonah's. Every room placed precisely. As if they were all mapping the same interior structure. A layout she placed inside them. A blueprint only she understood. And here's the worst part. When a psychologist from Atlanta was finally brought in, he looked at the drawn designs, the carvings, the repeating shapes. He didn't say a word for a long time. Then he whispered, "This isn't a house. This is how you train a mind. To obey." And the deeper investigators went, the more they realized. Miss Caldwell wasn't controlling men with charm. She wasn't using beauty. She wasn't threatening them. She was reformatting them. Rebuilding their fears. Redirecting their impulses. Rewiring their inner architecture. You don't manipulate men by changing their thoughts. You manipulate them by changing the hallways those thoughts travel through. And Miss Caldwell? She knew how to build hallways no man could escape. The men who interacted with Miss Caldwell all described one identical sensation, though none of them realized the others felt it. A pull. Not like lust. Not like fear. Not like admiration. Something deeper. Something colder. Something that felt almost mechanical. One man compared it to the sensation of stepping into a room and realizing the furniture had been rearranged, not by sight, but by instinct. Another said it felt like someone had opened a drawer inside his skull and quietly placed something inside. But the most disturbing account came from Samuel Darin, a merchant known for his discipline, emotional restraint, and near-obsessive self-control. Darin visited her only once. He never spoke to her. He never touched her. He claimed he didn't even look directly at her. He merely walked past her on the road as she fed crows from a paper bag. Yet that was enough. 2 months later, Samuel Darin burned his entire shop to the ground. Not out of rage. Not out of desperation. But because, as he told his wife before the flames took everything, she put a room in me. And I keep waking up inside it. When asked what that meant, he said something investigators still can't fully decipher. There are no windows. No doors. Just a center. A place where all my choices point. His wife begged him to explain. He repeated the phrase, as though reciting a line from a blueprint. One entrance. One exit. Both hers. That same week, 3 other men who never met Samuel, wrote nearly identical statements in their journals. Her center. Her room. No doors. Only her. Patterns within patterns. Behavior threading itself into identical loops. The psychologist from Atlanta returned. He studied the journals, the drawings, the testimonies. Then he said something no one understood at the time. She isn't influencing them. She's hosting them. When pressed, he added, she builds a structure inside them. And once the structure is complete, their minds migrate. A chilling question emerged. If these men were waking up inside a mental architecture she created, where was she inside theirs? Because control is one thing. Occupation is another. And the men of Harrow's parish weren't behaving like followers. They were behaving like tenants. Tenants in a property they did not own. But she did. It began with the simplest symptom. A pause. A tiny silence inside each investigator's mind. A gap that didn't belong to them. The sheriff felt it first. A sensation like someone had placed a fingertip on the back of his thoughts. Pressing gently. Not painful. Not invasive. Just present. Like a rhythm waiting to be followed. He blinked hard. The world didn't blink back. The house, the porch, Evelyn's still silhouette. Everything seemed framed, arranged. As if unseen hands had subtly rotated the entire scene to reveal a more correct alignment. His pulse stuttered. Not from fear. From synchronization. The psychologist dropped his notebook. His breath caught as a cold recognition spread through him. A thought that wasn't his. A realization that arrived fully formed. As if someone else had lived it first. All structures repeat. All structures require a center. You are entering alignment. His skin prickled. He tried to shake his head. But his neck resisted. As if some invisible brace had been fitted around his spine. He whispered, trembling. I can't tell which thoughts are mine. Evelyn stepped forward. Not threatening. Not hostile. Just serene. Like a conductor approaching a choir ready to sing. The pattern doesn't steal your thoughts, she said. It organizes them. The deputy sank to his knees, palms pressed against his temples. He could feel shapes. Mental shapes. Sliding into position behind his eyes. Not hallucinations. Not madness. But a blueprint. A quiet, geometric hum. The sheriff sucked in a deep breath. And froze. Because his exhale matched the psychologist's. Perfectly. A mirrored rhythm. Shared timing. Shared breath. A shiver crawled up every spine. Their nervous systems had fallen into synchronous cadence. Not from fear. Not from suggestion. From integration. Evelyn's voice flowed over them, soft but inescapable. The orchard pattern rewards coherence. It punishes chaos. It does not want to destroy you. It wants you to become more structured. The psychologist slammed his back against the porch railing, panting. A single tear ran down his face. Not from emotion, but from the overwhelming sensation of order threading through his mind. A terrifying clarity. A mechanical calm. I can feel it mapping me, he whispered. I can feel it rearranging where my fear goes. The sheriff tried to speak. And heard two voices. His own. And a second whisper half a beat behind. A harmonic echo matching the pattern's cadence. His vision warped. The horizon tilted. Every tree in the distance bent at the same angle. The exact angle Evelyn had tilted her head earlier. As if the entire world was adjusting. To her posture. To the center. Evelyn closed her eyes, inhaled deeply. And every man on the porch inhaled with her. Not because they wanted to. But because something inside them now recognized her breath. As the metronome of the structure taking root. Then she said the words that shattered the last illusion of resistance. You are not losing yourselves. You are becoming aligned. And with that, the orchard pattern completed its first phase. Inside their minds. It began as a faint shimmer behind their eyelids. A glow that didn't blink or flicker. A light that seemed to wait for them. To notice it. The sheriff felt it first. Not a vision. Not quite. More like a blueprint unfolding in darkness. Lines sketching themselves across the inside of his mind. With deliberate, terrifying precision. When he closed his eyes, he didn't see black. He saw architecture. Geometric pulses. Concentric arcs. Interlocking rings that rotated in silence. As if following a mathematics too ancient for human tongues. He gasped. But the gasp wasn't his alone. The psychologist and the deputies inhaled in the same second. The same pitch. The same fear-struck shudder. Because they were all seeing it. Each one. In perfect unison. The psychologist tried to look away. But how do you look away from something inside your skull? How do you escape a vision that is not shown to you, but shown through you? The lines sharpened. The arcs locked into place. A central void formed. A pulsing emptiness. Perfectly circular. Impossibly stable. And from that void, the pattern began to reveal itself. It was not a code. It was not a signal. It was not a curse. It was an instruction. A blueprint for restructuring the mind. From the inside out. The deputy screamed when the diagram rotated. Not because of pain. But because he suddenly recognized it. Not from books. Not from memory. From something older. And deeper. Scratched into the human animal long before language. It's a wheel, he stammered. No, a mandala. The psychologist cut him off. Eyes wide with horror and awe. It's a cognitive centrifuge. He understood now. They all did. The pattern was sorting their thoughts. separating what was essential from what was chaos. Stripping away doubt, individuality, free will. Anything that didn't align with its geometry. And the more they tried to resist, the clearer the diagram became. Sharper. More beautiful. More unforgiving. The sheriff clutched his head as tears streamed down his face. I can feel it. Removing things, he whispered. What things? One deputy asked, voice trembling. He swallowed hard. Memories that don't fit. The psychologist's breath stuttered. He felt something slipping out of him. A childhood detail. The shape of his mother's face. The smell of his first apartment. Small pieces. But they were pieces of him. And the pattern stripped them. Without emotion. Without hesitation. Without malice. Because to the pattern, this wasn't an attack. This was construction. Evelyn watched them silently. Her expression calm. Almost maternal. They are only removing the parts that stand in the way, she said gently. The pattern builds with whatever remains. Behind them, the invisible geometry pulsed again. Louder now. Like a heartbeat they could hear inside their bones. And in that moment, every man understood the same terrifying truth. The pattern was not something you learned. It was something you became. The air shifted before the merger, subtle at first. A tremor that ran beneath skin and stone alike. The room's walls seemed to bend, stretching toward Evelyn as if the very fabric of reality were leaning to witness what was about to occur. The anchor pulsed in time with her heartbeat. A slow, deliberate rhythm, synchronizing the lattice of her mind with its own unearthly geometry. Every filament of its structure reached toward her, like fingers seeking the axis of a world they had yet to claim. Evelyn's pupils dilated, her consciousness stretching in directions she could not name. It was not just her mind that opened. Her body, her senses, her memory, every molecule aligned. Recalibrated, woven into the lattice of the anchor. She did not scream. She did not resist. She could not. The men, still partially trapped in the discarded husks of their former selves, watched helplessly as the glow enveloped her. The sheriff felt his identity fracture. Threads of his being pulled into the anchor like silk through a loom. Even the psychologist, mind half consumed, felt an icy clarity. The vessel and the structure were becoming one. The pattern of her thoughts, her desires, her deepest fears, folded into the anchor's lattice, filling the hollow cavity that had devoured so many before. And as the final filament touched the center of her consciousness, the world outside began to fracture. Light bent unnaturally. Shadows stretched in impossible directions. The candle flames elongated and multiplied, reflecting not the physical room, but the internal geometry of Evelyn now merged with the anchor. The chapel's walls groaned, not as wood or stone, but as if reality itself was protesting, resisting the integration of human will and pattern intelligence. Evelyn's voice emerged, layered, simultaneously her own and impossibly many others. I am the vessel. I am the axis. And everything you thought you knew will now bend to the shape of truth. The sheriff felt a pull from the air itself. Gravity shifted. Time seemed to pulse, stretching seconds into eternities. He realized the anchor did not merely inhabit Evelyn. It redefined her existence. And in doing so, began rewriting the boundaries of the physical world. Outside, the forest shivered. Birds froze mid-flight. Streams reversed. Even the moonlight fractured into prisms that reflected realities that should not exist. The anchor and Evelyn were no longer separate. They were singular. The world became a reflection of the lattice inside her. A terrifying, meticulous order rising from the chaos of human minds consumed and discarded. For the men left watching. For the sheriff. For the psychologist. There was no question left. Evelyn had become something beyond comprehension. And the anchor, once a construct, was now alive through her. And through her, unstoppable. The first ripple began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A thought here, a hesitation there, small deviations in logic. Tiny fractures in perception. Those who approached Evelyn, or even glimpsed her from afar, felt it immediately. Their minds were no longer entirely their own. The sheriff noticed it first. A memory he had relied upon for 20 years. Suddenly felt borrowed. As if some invisible archivist had rewritten its edges. Names he once knew blurred into unrecognizable forms. Decisions he made instinctively now carried an alien weight. A suggestion that he had never truly acted alone. The psychologist tried to map it scientifically. He scribbled in his notebook. Lines of equations bending into impossible patterns. Each variable shifted mid-calculation. The anchor Evelyn had infiltrated cognition itself. Making thought a malleable substance. Controllable, divisible, assignable. For the men previously consumed and discarded. The experience was worse. Though physically absent, their essences lingered in the lattice. Their instincts, memories, and fears pulsed through Evelyn's consciousness. Feeding the growing, self-sustaining web. They were aware, terribly aware. Yet powerless to act independently. The pattern had chosen which fragments to retain. And what it retained, it controlled completely. Even those who were untouched physically felt a creeping influence. A farmer passing near the chapel's threshold found himself compelled to kneel. A child glimpsing the glow of the windows shivered and muttered words not taught by any parent. Thoughts were no longer private. Desires were no longer secret. The anchor Evelyn curated consciousness itself. Evelyn moved through the world now like a nexus of inevitability. Her voice alone could rearrange perception. A question, a pause, a casual glance. Each enough to cause subtle shifts in behavior. To rewrite priorities, to recalibrate fears. Every observer was being absorbed cognitively. Folded into a network they could not resist. And in the shadows of the chapel, where the original men had once plotted resistance, silence reigned. Not peace. Not surrender. A quiet acknowledgement that they had already lost. The world outside began to reflect this new order. Every decision, every instinct, every impulse of the living was now a resonance of the anchor Evelyn lattice. A new structure of reality emerged. Silent, invisible, absolute. And only one truth remained clear. Any who approached without understanding would be bent to its will. Their minds harvested, their essences catalogued. Becoming yet another node in the growing pattern of inevitability.